Hello and welcome to the overview of the Ethics Syllabus, PHI 3601. Two things to keep in mind. First, this is an overview of the syllabus, and I don't go through every single bureaucratic detail of the syllabus with all the policies, procedures, and so forth. To see all those, look at the PDF version of the syllabus available on Canvas. Secondly, this is just a general syllabus, so I don't have to re-record it every time I teach the course, and so be sure to consult the PDF version of the syllabus for the actual dates when things are due and deadlines and office hours, etc. And these are also on Canvas as well. I am Dr. Michael Labossiere. I get my PhD from the Ohio State University, and yes, they do make us say the. And I started teaching at FAMU in 1993, so I've been doing this for a while. My office is 203 Tucker Hall. The phone there is 850-561-2839 for those who use phones. This phone probably doesn't support text, so I don't know if anyone's ever tried to send me a text, but it presumably does not work. My email is michael.labossiere@famu.edu, and of course Canvas has a very good messaging system, which is useful as well. In terms of the purposes and goals and objectives of the course, again, the syllabus goes through these, as you can see by the tiny text, in great detail. But speaking in general terms, the course is about ethics, good and evil, right and wrong, and all that stuff. And the purpose is not to teach you my moral views or transform you into a moral or evil person. It's to learn about various moral methods of reasoning, moral theories, and moral issues. And to this end, you'll do the readings, attend and participate in lectures and so forth, and complete quizzes, exams, and papers. And again, all of the particular details for the purpose, goals, and objectives laid out in the PDF version of the syllabus. For my office hours, again, see the particular semester. The syllabus is on Canvas in PDF form, also Canvas. My office, again, is 203 Tucker Hall, and also I do, thanks to the pandemic, have also include Zoom office hours, and those are available even post-pandemic, whenever that might occur. And on Canvas, there's a quick guide to if you want to set up a Zoom appointment. And the reason why I do appointments for Zoom is because I do have to set up the meeting, and and can't just have it generally open to everyone because you might want to talk about your grades, etc. But there's more of that on the Canvas guides. For the topics for the course splits into 4 distinct parts. Each part has its own set of quizzes that cover just those parts, and each part has its own distinct exams 1 through 4, that cover each of its parts just comprehensively. So exam 1, part 1, exam 2, part 2, exam 3, part 3, exam 4, part 4. There's also a final, which I'll speak more of later, that covers everything. Part 1 deals primarily with ethical reasoning and the basics of ethics. So not surprising, we'll look at the introduction to ethics there and focus heavily on methods of moral reasoning. Looking also at argument basics, general reasoning, but focusing primarily on ethical reasoning for 2 purposes. One, for the paper, so you'll be able to write the paper, which is an argumentative essay in ethics. And secondly, because being able to reason about ethics effectively is a useful skill. In part 2, we'll take a look at some of the classical ethical theories, the ones that are considered sort of, the big dogs of ethics. Now, there are thousands upon thousands of different ethical theories, so we cannot possibly cover all of them, but we'll hit some of the main ones, while also leaving out, many, as you might imagine. We'll begin with probably one of the oldest moral theories, which is virtue theory, the idea that to be good is to develop your virtues. We'll look at our good dead friend Confucius, talking about the doctrine of the mean, and then we'll look at our good dead friend Aristotle, who developed a very similar theory on virtue, and we'll look at both of them as exemplars of virtue theory. Next, we'll turn to looking at ethics and religion, which is also a very old source of ethics. We'll look at our good dead friend St. Thomas Aquinas, his Summa Theologica, look at a bit from the Bible. We'll have kind of a side thing with the Euthyphro, with Plato, and We'll also look at our good dead friend, uh, going on to consequentialism, look at our good dead friend Tommy Hobbes talking about ethical egoism. Quickly put, consequentialism is, shockingly enough, the idea that you should assess things based on their, shockingly, consequences. And consequentialism, as we'll see in the future, is not itself like necessarily a moral theory. You could be a consequentialist about profits, trying to maximize your profits, for example. And there are moral versions of consequentialism. We'll look at two of the main ones: ethical egoism, with our good dead friend Thomas Hobbes. And that's the view that what you should do and what I should do is try to maximize self-interest. So you should try to maximize your self-interest. I should try to maximize my self-interest. And this view goes way back, and it's also very relevant to current American politics. For example, the Tea Party, which has been quiet lately, they explicitly endorsed the views of Ayn Rand, who was a modern, but still dead, ethical egoist. Then we'll turn to kind of a kinder, gentler form of consequentialism with utilitarianism, developed by our good dead friend John Stuart Mill. To put it in bumper sticker terms, this is kind of the bumper sticker slogan of the greatest good for the greatest number. And Mill developed that theory. There are thousands, probably tens of thousands of versions of utilitarianism now, but we'll just stick with kind of one of the originals. There's actually a version before Mill. Then we'll head to deontology, which is from the Greek deon, meaning duty, not like howdy doody or doggy duty, but duty like in responsibility. And in general, deontological ethics, of which there are, again, probably thousands, they tend to focus on rule-based ethics. Put in bumper sticker terms, the idea would be, obey the rules, but only the correct rules. You don't have to obey all the rules, just the right ones. Our paradigm example here is our good dead friend Immanuel Kant with his famous categorical imperative. And again, there are thousands of versions of deontology, but we'll look at probably the best known one, Kant and his categorical imperative. Then we'll head to ethical relativism. That's the view that morality is, shockingly enough, relative, that there's not objective or absolute morality. And our example here will be our good dead friend Herodotus, also considered by some the father of history. And we'll look at his essay from way back in the way back, Custom is King. Then we'll head on to part 3, goodness and equality, which includes the question of, why be good? And if you want to be good, or more likely want other people to be good, how do you make that happen? We'll begin with the classic Ring of Gyges, an excerpt from the Republic of Plato, which examines the question of why be good if you can get away with being evil? And we'll see the answer given by our good dead friend Socrates. Then, assuming we want to be moral educated or want other people to be moral educated, we'll look at two contrasting and conflicting views that have been adopted in various forms worldwide. Probably the most adopted one, which most likely is the one that you were educated in, and I definitely was, is kind of the Aristotelian model, which is essentially moral education through the compulsive power of the state. And we'll look at his view. Then we'll look at an alternative view from Jean-Jacques Rousseau, also dead, in his classic Emile, in which he looks at kind of a natural moral education. And we'll look at the contrasting views between them. Then we'll head into the area of equality, which is a big issue today, but it's always been a pretty big issue. We'll begin looking at The Rights of Woman by Mary Wollstonecraft. She's the mother of Mary Shelley, who is, of course, the author of Frankenstein. She was writing in the 1700s, so we'll use her as both an example of historical feminism, but also look at what she was arguing then and compare it to now to see if what she called for has been brought about. Then we'll turn to looking at race and equality with the famous I Have a Dream speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Then we'll move away, interestingly enough, from humans. We'll take a look at animals and their rights with our good dead friend Thomas Aquinas again, looking at the question of whether killing animals would be morally wrong. This may seem like an odd thing to consider from someone like St. Thomas Aquinas, but in Christianity and other religions, killing is often considered a sin. And Aquinas actually considers 3 arguments as to why killing and eating animals could be morally wrong. Then we'll turn to our good dead friend René Descartes, famous French philosopher. He's the I think therefore am guy. And he talks about, or rather writes about, the automatism of animals. It's a view that has informed science for a long time, and weirdly enough has only recently changed, which is, his view is, animals essentially are God's robots. They're organic machines, which have no minds. Then we'll turn to Immanuel Kant, and his view is interesting because he, on one hand, makes it clear that animals have no moral status. Much like Descartes, he holds they're just objects. But he argues that we should still be kind to them. And it's kind of an interesting way where, he tries to make a better view than his philosophy would seem to justify, advocating being kind to animals. Then we'll turn to looking at artificial beings. As of yet, we do not seem to have any fully developed artificial beings that would qualify morally as far as we know, but we'll look at that as a future potential, looking at a chapter I wrote for a book a little while ago on testing the moral status of artificial beings. So if you like science fiction and things like Blade Runner and Ex Machina and Ghost in the Shell and so forth, you might enjoy this, and if not, you'll probably hate it. Then in part 4, we'll take a look at rights and liberty. And these are always important, but especially important today, for obvious reasons. And we'll look at 2 of kind of the founding thinkers of the notion of rights, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. They both agree on the notion that there are rights. They both use this model of a thing called the state of nature, which we'll look at, but they differ considerably. Hobbes is the, basically life is nasty, brutish, and short, essentially focusing on the practicalities of power. And Locke is he has the idea that you have life, liberty, and property as rights even before government. Which, if you're familiar with the United States, we supposedly have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And as one of my poli-sci professors used to say, they didn't include, property because the writers of the Constitution had the property, and they didn't want other people getting ideas about touching their stuff. Then we'll head into obedience and liberty, looking at Crito, at a dialogue by Plato, which addresses the question of obeying the state. And it features, spoilers, the death of our good dead friend Socrates. Then we'll turn to Henry David Thoreau, an American, who originated the concept of civil disobedience, which is later adopted effectively by Gandhi, and then by coming back to the United States, Dr. King. And we'll look at his view of disobeying authority. Then we'll turn to a look at fascism, which is, again, for obvious reasons, important today, with the dead Mussolini, who's killed by his own people. He's a fascist, and we'll see what fascism is and what it says about liberty. And this is important today because people throw around the term fascism, indiscriminately in many ways. And even though, of course, you might say that words can mean whatever people want them to mean, we'll look at what the original fascist thought fascism was. And then we'll finish up with a more liberal view with a concept of liberty put forth by John Stuart Mill, essentially the principle of harm. Spoilers, you can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt other people, even if... In terms of the grade stuff, your grade depends on 4 things. 3 of them are the major stuff, and then a 4th thing. For the paper, there's 1 paper, and it counts. And it's 30% of the total grade. For the exams, there's a total of 5 exams, including the final, and the best 4 of these count. These are 35% of the grade. For the quizzes, there's a bunch of quizzes. There's a bunch for each section, and I throw in some extra ones. And no matter where they come from in this course, the best 10 count. So you select, or rather Canvas selects the best 10 from any of the ones you've done. And then there's also a 5% assessment grade, which is based on, we have to do assessment for our STARS report, and I won't go into any of the details of that, but that just says we have to collect assessment information, and that's incorporated in the grade as well. And I'll say more about that in the course when talking about assessment. Now for the quizzes are such that they all work like this. They're all on Canvas, and you can look at the content in terms of what the quiz covers. I have a description of it saying like this is about Aristotle's virtue theory, or this is about utilitarianism, so you know what it covers. And they do go in the order of the course, so each of the quizzes goes in order of material covered, with the exception of like the bonus ones at the end, which talk about what they cover. There's a 5-minute timer, and when the timer runs out, the quiz auto closes, and the timer keeps on going even if you're not watching. So it's not like Netflix where you can like pause it and then go back to it. It's like the movie theater where it just keeps on going even if you leave. And each quiz covers roughly a week of material. The best 10 of these count, and Canvas has a way of dropping scores that, if you're familiar with it, this is, will just be obvious and, completely non-problematic. But if you have been a student long enough that you remember the old Blackboard system, it may be slightly confusing and misleading. But I have a whole separate video and guide to how Canvas drops scores. So if you're not familiar with how the grading system works on Canvas, it all does it correctly, but it can be somewhat misleading, be sure to look at that video or look at that guide on Canvas. There's also one paper, as I mentioned. It's on an ethical issue. This class is a gen ed class, so it falls under the Gordon rule. So I'm required by law to have you write the paper and produce a certain number of words. For the paper guide, there's a complete PDF on the paper which walks you through step by step exactly to the paper, includes the rubrics of how the paper is graded, and includes a complete sample paper. There's also a PowerPoint on the paper if you want to click through that on your own, and there is a video on the paper. So we'll also go over the paper in class. So there's essentially 4 ways to get the information about the paper. It's all the same stuff, just different formats: PDF, PowerPoint, video, or in class, in person. There's a draft option you can turn in. The draft is ungraded in the sense that it doesn't count for against your grade. It doesn't hurt you to do it or not do it. You can do as many drafts as you wish. You can wish to do 0 because 0 is a number. You can do more, and each time you turn it in through Canvas, I'll put comments on it, put a tentative score on it, and you can just keep doing it or not as you wish. In terms of turning in the paper, there's a +5 deadline, which is the extra credit for the class, essentially. If you turn in the paper by when it's supposed to be turned in, you get your base score +5. If you need more time, there's an emergency deadline, which is a week later, which is full credit, and I have that in case something happens, like computer issues, life issues, work issues, whatever. There's also the 50% deadline, or some call it the desperation deadline, which is pretty much always the last day of classes, but again, always check the syllabus and Canvas to see when the final deadlines are. You will get a score for each of the deadlines: +5, emergency, and 50% deadline. And Canvas has a way of dropping scores. Again, it can be complicated if you're not familiar with it, but Canvas will keep your best score out of those 3. And you do not have to do the paper 3 times. It just keeps your best score. So if you do, for example, the +5 deadline, you don't have to turn the paper again for the emergency deadline, and you don't have to turn in the 50% deadline because those would just be dropped. For the exams, for 1 through 4, the normal exams, there are 25 true-false questions, 25 multiple-choice questions. It's on a 60-minute timer that keeps going even if you leave the exam. So be sure not to start it until you're sure you can complete it within the time available. Each exam, as I mentioned before, covers its own part. So exam 1 covers part 1, exam 2 covers part 2, etc. And again, Canvas has that possibly complicated dropping system. So if you're not familiar how Canvas's grades work, be sure to look at the guide on Canvas in the course. And there's a video and just a page set up with the same details in it. Exam 5 is the final. It consists of 50 true-false questions, 50 multiple-choice questions. It's on a 120-minute, 2-hour timer, and it pulls randomly from each of the 4 parts. So anything from part 1, 2, 3, or 4 can be on the final exam. And again, the way Canvas drops exams, that's all explained in a separate video and on Canvas. And as I mentioned, the best 4 to 5 exams count, and you have a couple options. One is if you have like a bad exam, you could take the final to replace it, because if the final is better, it replaces the worst of the other exams. Or if you are satisfied with your grade with the 4 exams and not taking the final, you could simply not take it. It'll score as a 0, but then it would be dropped. Again, look on Canvas for the course. Look at the guide to how Canvas, drops exams, how to do what-if scenarios before deciding not to take the final, because again, the grading system can mislead people who are not familiar with it. It's doing exactly what it should be doing, but if you're familiar with the old the old Blackboard system, there might be some unpleasant surprises. Grade scale is pretty standard. 90 to 100 is A, 80 to 89 is B, 70 to 79 C, 60 to 69 D, 0 to 59 F. In terms of doing a grade estimation, if you want to do it with Excel or Google Sheets, I have a kind of a leftover grade estimator from the Blackboard days, because Blackboard, when we were last using it, did not have a grade estimator, and you could use that if you want to. Canvas, however, has a what-if grade system. You can go in, and I have a guide to this on Canvas in the course, and you can go in and put in hypothetical scores and see what if. Not a cool what if like in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but a grade what if. And it's a good idea to check that before not, completing like exam 5 or quizzes, etc. Always, of course, keep in mind how Canvas is dropping grades and how the grading system works in Canvas. And, of course, keep up with your grades. Sometimes if people aren't aware of how the Canvas system works and never look at their grades, there can be unpleasant surprises at the end. There are many policies in the course, of course, and rather than simply read these into my microphone so you can hear them, you can look at the PDF of the syllabus, and it goes through each of these in great detail. The gist is academic honesty, yes, do that. Attendance, yes, please show up. Plagiarism, yeah, don't do that. It's super easy to catch plagiarism today. The papers do go through a plagiarism check, and it catches plagiarism. I typically get 3 to 5 cases of plagiarism per class. I don't take it personally. I don't get mad. I know what the person did. They know what they did, and that's that. And often I see them in the next course, and they don't plagiarize again. So avoid that. Generally, it's better just to put together anything you can assemble and turn it in that's your work, rather than risking the plagiarism. FAMU has address standards. You can look at those in the syllabus or the student handbook. I have no fashion sense, so don't ask me about that. There are various grade policies specified in the syllabus. Behavior, I guess, you specified in the student handbook. The course, pretty much everything for the course is on Canvas. I have the notes there, the readings there. These videos will be accessible through there. Changes. If there's any changes, like in classroom location or time, back some years ago, room changes were not that uncommon. I had some semesters where my room was changed 2 or 3 times. And fortunately, that doesn't happen in a long time, but if a room change does occur, I'll announce it on Canvas, which makes it easier than it used to be way before email and Canvas. Other policies, cheating is bad. Compliance, this course complies with all relevant laws and policies. Email, best way to contact me, or through Canvas messaging. Enrollment, you got to be enrolled to get a grade for obvious reasons. For excuses, generally you only have to worry about those if you have extensive absences. For the most part, as we'll see in just a moment, the makeups are kind of like, they don't we don't have them in the course, but as we'll see in a bit, we don't actually typically need them. If you miss a lot of classes, contact me, let me know, could try to get you through the course. Grade discussion, always happy to go over grades. Obviously can't do it during class in public because of FERPA reasons. Also can't discuss grades with anybody else other than you and anyone you give permission to. You can't give permission to people in writing for me to talk to them about your grades, but otherwise your grade is only between you and me and I guess iRattler. Grade information, the grades will be on Canvas very quickly. All the things are auto-graded, will be instantaneously available, and the paper I grade as quickly as I can, consistent with grading them fairly, and so you'll always be able to see your grade on Canvas. For incompletes, there are very strict rules for incompletes. Be sure to look at those on the syllabus to see if you qualify for them. In general, they're not typically needed because the way the course is designed, people can typically, if they qualify for an incomplete, they usually can just finish the course and be done with it and not have to worry about trying to get that done in the future. For makeups, strictly speaking, there are no normal makeups in the course. And the reason why is because you have a month to do the quizzes for a section. Like part 1 quizzes are due a month into the semester, so it gives you lots of time to do them. With the exams 1 through 4, you have until a month after we finish this. 1 through 3, you have until a month after the section to complete it. With exam 4, it just deadlines, and the final just deadlines, and so there's a lot of time to complete the work. And so there typically wouldn't be a need for a makeup, because if you weren't able to do an exam, that would mean being unable to do work for over a month. Now that could conceivably happen, in which case I'd be happy to work with you. But in general, I avoid the need for makeups by just making all the work available from day 0 and making it available for a really long time. Last day of office hours and classes. Last time I held office hours, last time to get stuff done except for the final, mainly just for practicality, just to have kind of a closing for the stuff in the course. For unusual special circumstances, if your circumstances are unusual or special that impact the course, then by definition they're unusual or special, so I don't know what they might be. Contact me as soon as possible, and I'm always happy to work with you within the requirements of the university, relevant laws, etc., and to see to it that you're able to complete the course. For the academic learning compacts, for philosophy and religion, we have academic learning compacts. They're specified here on the slide, also in the syllabus in detail, and this is essentially you'll get skills in written communication, critical thinking, critical concepts and methods of philosophy and religion, ethical and social responsibility, and research and writing, basically writing the papers. The QEP for FAMU is, as I'm recording this, is right on FAMU. This is not a QEP course, but I mention this because we're supposed to. For the calendar for the course, see the semester syllabus, particular one, the PDF one, and also on Canvas. Now, one thing it's important to keep in mind is the distinction between due dates versus deadlines. Even though people often take them to mean the same thing, here's the distinction. There'll be due dates for the work, and a due date is when the assignment, quiz, exam should be completed. There's also deadlines, and that's when the assignment or quiz must be completed, and if it's not completed, it will no longer be available. Now, in some cases, those are the same. Quizzes, their due date and the deadline, the same. But exams have a different system. So for exams 1 through 3, they have a due date, which is the end of the 4 weeks that we cover the material. But for exams 1 through 3, you get another month for the deadline. Like as I mentioned before, rather than mess around with makeups, etc., you just get a whole extra month to complete it, and should be able to finish the exam during that month. Exam 4, of course, there's no month after the semester because we're done, and same with exam 5, there's no more after that. So For exams 4 and 5, they have just deadlines. The quizzes also just have deadlines. They're just available until the end of that section, unless something relevant that comes up. For example, some years back we had a hurricane, so everybody was without power, so deadlines were changed. For the draft, the deadline is a practical one. It's as late as you can turn in the paper and give me time to actually look at it and get it back to you. That's why it has a deadline. There's also include like a due date, which is essentially like if you really want to work on your paper early, maybe get a draft in by then. For the paper deadlines, there's the +5 deadline, the emergency deadline, and the 50% deadline. And the paper just has deadlines. So when the +5 deadline rolls around, then when it expires, that's it. Same for the emergency deadline, etc. If there are issues with Canvas, which there sometimes are, but seemingly less so than we had with Blackboard, let me know. And the main things that I can do are pretty limited in terms of fixing, like going in and fixing like an exam if you have a technical issue. Mostly it's I can like submit it or give you another attempt. So by default is if there's something goes terribly wrong with an exam, unless you say otherwise, what I'll typically do if I find proof that it was in fact there was a technical issue that prevented you from completing it, I will add in like another attempt for you. That's pretty much my default. Now that of course means that you start the exam or quiz over again, and it doesn't keep like your whatever previous score you got before. In terms of monitoring it, I do check it regularly. The deadlines you'll note when you look at the syllabus are pretty much always like 11:59 p.m. I do not stay up that late, and so I won't be sitting there, monitoring my email and Canvas, waiting for someone to have a problem at 11:58 p.m. I typically stop checking my email around 5 p.m. if I have a night class, and then of course I'll be teaching until 8 or so, but I generally don't check my email like late at night, and I won't be sitting there watching Canvas late at night. The 11:59 deadline is basically a courtesy. I used to have it deadlining earlier so I could check on it, but people wanted the deadline late at night, and I asked people, I won't stay up for that. Is that still okay? And people were fine with that generally. So keep in mind that I won't be monitoring exams at 11 o'clock at night. So if something goes wrong at 11 o'clock at the deadline, then that could be a problem. So that concludes our overview of the syllabus for ethics. Again, be sure to consult the PDF syllabus to see all the exact bureaucratic details in great detail, and all the particular dates and times for the semester you're taking the class. So stay safe, and I'll see you in the future.